The church bells were already ringing when I arrived, but I wasn't inside the chapel. I stood in the shadows of the courtyard, my heart pounding against my ribs, the sound blending with the muffled organ music, echoing through the stained glass windows. "Dad, please don't come. You'll ruin everything." Those were my son Nathan's last words to me 2 nights before his wedding. I could still hear his voice, sharp and cold, cutting through the phone line like a knife. My own son, the boy I had raised after his mother walked out, the boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose science projects I'd stayed up all night helping with, the boy who once called me his hero. He told me I wasn't welcome at his own wedding. And why? Because his fiance's family thought I wasn't refined enough. They said I was embarrassing. A construction worker. Rough hands, plain suit, the wrong kind of English at the wrong kind of table. Not the polished father-in-law they wanted for their precious daughter. I remember gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Nathan," I said, my voice trembling between anger and heartbreak, "I built this life for you. Every single brick, every single dollar, every single sacrifice was so you could stand where you are today." There was a pause on the line. For one hopeful moment, I thought he would understand. But then his reply came, colder than winter. "Dad, I love you, but this isn't about you. Please don't show up." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by reminders of a life spent giving everything to a son who now wanted nothing to do with me. The flickering light from the old lamp reflected off my work boots by the door, the same boots that had carried me through 30 years of double shifts to pay for Nathan's private school, his college tuition, his dream of becoming a lawyer. And now, because I didn't fit into some polished picture of perfection, I was discarded like a used-up tool. But they had forgotten something. The wedding could not truly begin without me. Not because of tradition, not because of love, but because of something far more binding, something no one in that chapel yet knew. So I waited outside, the music swelling inside, the guests rising to their feet, the bride walking down the aisle in a gown worth more than my entire year's wages. And just as the priest prepared to speak, I placed my hand on the heavy wooden doors. When they opened, everything changed. I didn't open the doors yet. Not then. I let my hand rest on the polished wood, feeling the vibration of the organ through my fingertips. Inside, their world looked perfect. Outside, mine had already crumbled. I remembered the day Nathan was born. It was a cold February morning, snow piled high against the hospital windows. His mother was exhausted, her face pale, but when they placed that tiny wriggling bundle in her arms, she smiled. I'll never forget the smell of baby powder and disinfectant, the way his fist wrapped around my finger as if he'd never let go. Except he did. When Nathan turned 6, his mother walked out. She said life with a man like me, always covered in dust, always working overtime, always too tired for parties and vacations, was not the life she wanted. I raised him alone. Just me, a toolbox, and a promise. He would never feel the emptiness I felt that day. Every night after long shifts, I'd sit with him at the kitchen table I'd built myself. We did homework under the dim yellow glow of the ceiling light, the smell of my burned coffee always lingering. He'd ask questions about the stars, about dinosaurs, about why I worked so much. And I'd tell him, so you can have a future better than mine. That table still stands in my house, its wood scratched and stained with years of pencil marks and spilled milk. To me, it's a symbol of everything I poured into his life. To him, it's probably just an old piece of furniture. By the time Nathan reached high school, I had taken every extra shift the company offered. My knees ached, my back screamed, but I never let him see me falter. I bought him his first suit for debate club. He looked so sharp standing in front of that mirror, adjusting the tie I barely knew how to knot. "You're going to do great things," I whispered, and I believed it. College was worse. Tuition crushed me, but I paid every penny. I still remember lying awake at night, the sound of my old refrigerator humming, the sharp winter wind slipping through the cracks in the window. I'd stare at the ceiling, calculating how many more jobs I needed to take just to cover the next semester. Sometimes I thought I'd collapse, but then I'd see his acceptance letters framed on his desk, and I'd keep going. When he graduated as a lawyer, he hugged me, his voice thick with tears. "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you." For a moment I thought my sacrifices had been worth it. But people change, or maybe they just reveal who they always were. When Nathan met Claire, his fiancée, everything began to shift. At first I was happy she was polite, elegant, from a wealthy family, but soon I noticed the little things, the way she winced when I showed up in work boots at their engagement dinner, the way her parents asked what I did for a living, then quickly changed the subject when I said construction. At Thanksgiving, I caught Claire whispering to Nathan as I served my homemade stuffing, the recipe his mother used to love. "He's sweet," she said, "but doesn't he feel out of place?" Nathan had laughed softly, trying to cover it, but the words stuck in me like glass. Then came the ultimate betrayal, his call 2 nights before the wedding. "Don't come." I spent that night pacing my small, dimly lit living room. My knees popped with every step, the floorboards groaning like they carried the weight of my disappointment. On the mantel, Nathan's childhood photos smiled back at me. Him in a Halloween costume I'd sewn by hand. Him with his first bike, my hand steadying the seat. Him at graduation, cap crooked, smile wide. I picked up the photo of us fishing, our favorite tradition. He was 12, holding a trout proudly, the sunlight reflecting off the lake. In the background, you could see the old red thermos I always carried, scratched and dented from years of use. That thermos has been with me through every season of my life, work, road trips, and mornings with Nathan by the lake. I set it on the table beside me that night, its metal cool against my palm, a reminder of who I am, a reminder of what I gave. And as I stared at that dented thermos, something inside me hardened. I realized Nathan didn't just exclude me, he erased me. And that was something I could never allow. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before dawn. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. I brewed my coffee, poured it into that same dented thermos, and sat at the kitchen table, the one scarred with decades of Nathan's homework scratches. The bitter steam curled into the air, filling the room with that familiar smell. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet before a storm. I replayed Nathan's words over and over. "Dad, please don't come. You'll ruin everything." Each repetition cut deeper, until the wound no longer bled sorrow, but something colder resolve. For 30 years I had bent my back, blistered my hands, and sacrificed my dreams so my son could stand tall. I had given him every tool, every opportunity, every ounce of my strength. And now, on the most important day of his life, I was cast aside like a relic, too worn to be displayed. That's when I opened the drawer of my old oak desk. Inside lay a folder of papers I hadn't touched in years. Bank transfers, receipts, copies of tuition checks, the contract for the house down payment. Proof that behind Nathan's polished life was my invisible labor. Every achievement of his rested on foundations I had built. And at the very top of the folder sat something else. The marriage license application he had asked me to co-sign months ago when Claire's family demanded financial guarantees. My name in black ink tied directly to this union. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. They wanted me invisible, but on paper, I was very much present. The breaking point wasn't just that I had been excluded, it was that I had been used. My sacrifices were good enough for their security, but my presence wasn't good enough for their image. That was when I knew. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't cause a scene. No, I would wait until the very moment they thought they had erased me completely. And then I would step back into the light. I stood, slipping the folder into my worn leather briefcase. I ran my hand along the surface of the table, one last time, the grooves and scratches like a map of our shared life. Then I picked up the thermos, still warm, and placed it inside as well. Outside, the morning sun had risen, casting a golden glow over the small house I'd kept alive all these years. My truck rumbled to life, its engine loud in the stillness, and I drove toward the church with a steady calm I hadn't felt in years. By the time I arrived, guests were filing in, dressed in silk and polished shoes. They glanced at me without recognition, as if I were just another worker passing through. That suited me fine. I stayed in the courtyard, hidden in plain sight, until the music began. And as the heavy wooden doors trembled with the sound of the organ, I tightened my grip on the briefcase. This was no longer just a wedding. It was the stage for my reckoning. I stood in the courtyard, my briefcase heavy at my side, and for the first time that morning, hesitation crept in. Through the stained glass windows, I could see colors dancing across the pews inside, red, blue, and gold, flickering like fragments of a life I no longer belonged to. Guests were seated. The bride's veil shimmered as she walked slowly toward the altar. And my son stood waiting, nervous but radiant. For a moment I felt my chest tighten, not from anger but from memory. I saw Nathan again at 8 years old, running through the yard barefoot, laughing so hard his voice carried through the neighborhood. I remembered the way his small hand fit into mine on the first day of school, how he clung to me at the door until the teacher gently pulled him inside. I had been his anchor, his safe place, his father. And now I was about to shatter the perfect image of his wedding day. The thought clawed at me. What if I ruin everything? What if he hates me forever? I paced near the stone wall of the church, my boots crunching against gravel. The briefcase felt heavier with each step. Inside, the documents waited, undeniable proof of how deeply I was woven into this day, this union. But a voice whispered inside me, "Walk away. Let him be happy, even if it's without you." I sat on the cold stone bench beneath the courtyard's old oak tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The scent of lilacs drifted from a nearby garden, reminding me of the flowers Nathan used to pick for his mother before she left. My throat tightened. What if stepping through those doors made me no better than the people who had cast me aside? What if vengeance replaced the last fragile strand between us with permanent silence? I pressed my hands against my knees, staring at the worn skin, the scars from years of labor. These hands had built his world. But could they also destroy it? The church bells rang again, pulling me back to the present. The ceremony was reaching its climax. Any longer, and the moment would pass. I reached into my briefcase and touched the dented thermos, its cool metal grounding me. I remembered Nathan at 12, his smile wide as we drank hot chocolate from that same thermos by the lake. A symbol of love, a symbol of sacrifice. The decision weighed heavier than the briefcase itself. Was I a father who would protect his son's illusion of perfection, or was I a man who demanded recognition for a lifetime of sacrifice? The doors loomed in front of me, their polished surface reflecting faintly in the morning sun. My hand trembled as I reached toward them, suspended between mercy and revelation. And in that suspended breath, I realized, sometimes love isn't about protecting. Sometimes love is about truth. If you were in my place, standing outside the very wedding you had paid for, after a lifetime of sacrifices, what would you do? Would you walk away quietly, letting them erase you as if you never mattered? Or would you step forward, carrying the truth that could shake every guest in that chapel? I'll be honest, in that moment, I wasn't sure myself. My heart begged me to protect my son's happiness, even if it meant being invisible. But my soul demanded justice. Tell me in the comments, what would you have chosen? And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened when I finally opened those doors is something no one in that church will ever forget. I rose from the bench, the oak tree's shadows still clinging to my shoulders like a reminder of hesitation. But hesitation no longer had a place in me. My boots echoed against the cobblestones as I walked toward the church doors, each step louder than the last, like a drumbeat announcing war. The air smelled of polished wood and incense as I pushed open the small side door and slipped into the back of the chapel. No one noticed me at first. They were too focused on the bride's slow steps down the aisle, the delicate lace of her gown catching in the soft light pouring through stained glass. I stayed in the shadows, clutching the briefcase. My pulse pounded in my ears, matching the rhythm of the organ. For years I had been invisible, working silently so others could shine. But in this moment, invisibility was my weapon. Nathan stood at the altar, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Claire as though the rest of the world had melted away. I studied him from the back pew. The suit, the confidence, the life I had built for him with my bare hands. Pride and pain twisted together inside me, until I could barely breathe. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the thermos inside my briefcase, grounding me. I remembered the mornings we'd shared coffee or cocoa from it, sitting by the lake in silence. Those moments were ours, and yet here I was, shut out of this moment, the biggest of his life. Guests whispered softly as the priest raised his hands, calling for silence. The bride's veil shimmered as she reached Nathan's side. He smiled. God, that smile. I'd worked my entire life just to see it. But this time, it wasn't for me. I leaned forward, the smell of fresh lilies from the floral arrangements flooding my senses. The fragrance should have been sweet, but it was suffocating, a symbol of celebration twisted into a reminder of exclusion. Claire's parents sat in the front row, their posture stiff, their designer clothes gleaming like armor. I remembered the way her father had once shaken my hand. Brief, cold, dismissive. "We're so glad Nathan found someone who elevates him," he'd said. Elevates him, as though my son had been living beneath the surface until their world lifted him out of the dirt I represented. The priest began speaking, his voice solemn, echoing off the high stone walls. His words blurred, swallowed by the storm inside me. I heard only fragments. Love, union, forever. My grip tightened on the briefcase. My knees felt heavy, but not from age, no, from the weight of decision. Should I walk down that aisle and reveal the truth now in front of every guest, every polished face that had judged me? Or should I wait? Let the vows be spoken, let the silence fall, and then step forward when their confidence was strongest. The candles flickered as if the air itself trembled with my indecision. The room smelled of wax and perfume, layers of artifice masking the rawness I carried. My breathing grew ragged. The walls seemed to close in, pressing me toward the aisle. I thought of Martha, Nathan's mother, and the day she left. Her parting words rang in my ears. "You'll never be enough for the life I want." She had been wrong then, but here, surrounded by wealth and pretense, her prophecy clung to me like a curse. No. Enough was enough. I shifted forward, my boots scraping against the floor, drawing a few curious glances from the back pews. My presence was beginning to register. Whispers started, subtle but growing, a ripple spreading across calm water. Nathan hadn't seen me yet. His smile still rested on Claire, his hand holding hers tightly. The briefcase felt alive in my grasp, its contents like a secret heartbeat ready to burst open. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the weight I carried. I was ready to use it. The first heads began to turn. A murmur drifted through the pews like a restless wind. Guests who hadn't seen me slip in now whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward the back of the church. I walked slowly, each step echoing against the polished stone floor. My boots unpolished, scuffed from years of labor, sounded out of place among the fine leather shoes and satin heels. The organist faltered for a second, hitting a wrong chord before quickly recovering. Nathan still hadn't noticed me. He was too focused on Claire, his eyes shining with nervous devotion. Her veil trembled slightly, catching the candlelight like a crown of fire. For everyone else, it was a perfect picture. For me, it was a play staged without the man who had funded the stage itself. I clutched the briefcase tighter, my palm damp with sweat. The dented thermos pressed against the inside, its familiar weight anchoring me as if whispering, "Don't let them erase you." Claire's father shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened when he finally spotted me. His wife followed his gaze, her painted smile faltering. They recognized me instantly, though they had prayed I'd stay hidden, tucked away where people like me belonged. Their discomfort fed me like oxygen. The priest's voice wavered slightly as I reached the midpoint of the aisle. "We are gathered here today," he began again, but the weight of the silence behind his words betrayed the shift in the room. The storybook ceremony was cracking, and they all felt it. I thought of Nathan as a boy, waiting at the bus stop with his backpack too big for his shoulders. I'd worked late nights just to buy him that pack, bright blue with reflective strips for safety. I could see him turning to wave at me each morning, his smile filled with trust. That boy trusted me with his world. And yet the man at the altar had locked me out of his. I reached the front pews. Claire's parents stiffened, clearly debating whether to rise and confront me. But they didn't. They wouldn't dare. Not here. Not in front of their audience. That was the difference between us. They only played strong when the curtains were closed. Nathan finally saw me, his head jerked slightly, his smile freezing on his lips. His hand tightened around Claire's. Confusion first, then disbelief, then the faintest flicker of fear. "Dad," he mouthed silently, his voice lost in the echoing chamber. Every muscle in me screamed to answer, to shout, to let him and everyone else hear the years of betrayal, of sacrifice, of abandonment. But I kept walking, calm, measured, deliberate. Whispers spread faster now. Guests leaned toward one another, their perfect posture collapsing into gossip. Who was I? Why was I walking forward with such intent? The priest tried to steady the room. "Marriage is a sacred bond," he said louder, but his eyes betrayed unease. Even he knew something was coming. I stopped just short of the altar steps. The scent of lilies and roses was overwhelming now, almost sickening. My gaze met Nathan's, and for a long, silent moment, it was just us, father and son, tethered by decades of love, broken by one devastating choice. "Dad," he whispered this time, barely audible, but I caught it. A plea, a warning, a question all at once. Claire turned to look at me, her face pale beneath the veil. She didn't recognize me as the man who had carried her fiancé's childhood on his back. To her, I was an intruder, a disruption. But to Nathan, I was the ghost of everything he wanted to forget. I placed the briefcase gently on the first pew, the sound of leather against wood louder than the murmurs. And then, for the first time in years, I straightened my shoulders, standing tall, unbroken. I didn't need to speak yet. My presence alone was rewriting the story they had tried to erase me from. But I knew this was only the beginning. The silence in the church was deafening. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I rested my hand on the briefcase, its leather worn smooth by years of use. Inside, the papers waited, the receipts, the tuition checks, the contract that bore my name alongside my son's. Proof that I was not just some forgotten man in the shadows. Proof that this ceremony was built on my sacrifice. I looked at Nathan. His lips parted as though he wanted to say something, but no words came. His eyes darted nervously between me and the priest, then to Claire, whose hand clutched his with white-knuckled desperation. This was it. The moment when I could either bow my head and walk out quietly, or finally take back the voice they had tried to strip from me. I heard Martha's voice in my memory, the day she left. "You'll never be enough for the life I want." For years I feared she was right. But standing here, staring at the altar, I realized she had been wrong. I had always been enough, more than enough, and I would prove it now. The priest cleared his throat nervously, fumbling for his words. "Do we have all present family here today?" His eyes flickered to me, betraying the tension that gripped the room. I stepped forward. The scuff of my boots against the marble floor rang louder than any organ. A ripple of gasp moved through the guests, their whispers sharpening into audible shock. Nathan's face paled. "Dad, please," his voice cracked, breaking under the weight of both shame and fear. I held his gaze. "You told me not to come," I said, my voice steady but low, carrying across the chapel. "But you forgot one thing. You cannot erase the man who carried you here." The room seemed to contract around me. Claire's father shifted forward as if ready to object, but the intensity of my words froze him in place. His wife clutched her pearls, eyes wide with horror. I placed the briefcase on the altar step. Slowly, deliberately, I unlatched it. The metallic click of the locks echoed like gunfire in the silence. Every head craned forward. Every breath waited. Inside lay the documents, bank records, legal contracts, even the co-signed marriage license. I pulled them out one by one, spreading them across the polished wood. Paper rustled like thunder in the silence. This wedding, this future, all of it exists because of me. My voice trembled, but not with weakness, with the force of years finally finding words. I built the foundation, and yet I was told to stay away, to hide, to pretend I was nothing. Gasps rippled through the pews. Claire's parents' faces flushed red, their perfect masks cracking. Nathan's eyes glistened, torn between anger and guilt, pride and shame. He opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand, silencing him with nothing but presence. There was no going back now. I had stepped into the story they tried to erase me from, and whatever came next, they would never forget that I was here. For a long moment, the church was silent, except for the rustle of papers spread across the altar. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being seen. Nathan stared at the documents, his chest rising and falling as though the air itself had turned heavy. Slowly he stepped forward, leaving Claire frozen behind him. His voice wavered, but it carried through the chapel. "Dad, I didn't want it to be like this." The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. Claire's parents exchanged quick, panicked glances, their carefully planned display unraveling in front of their friends. Nathan's eyes glistened as he looked at me. "You've given me everything," he admitted, his voice raw. "And maybe I was wrong to push you away." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words I had longed to hear. The acknowledgement I thought would never come. It was there, hanging in the air between us. My grip tightened around the dented thermos still resting in the briefcase, grounding me. Could it be? After years of silence and exclusion, was my son finally seeing me again? "Dad," he continued, his voice steadier now, "you didn't need to do this. You didn't need to come here like this. If you had just given me time, I would have made it right." My heart ached. The boy I raised, the boy who once clung to my hand at the bus stop, was reaching for me again, not with fingers but with words. The guests seemed to lean forward, as if they too hoped for a reconciliation. For a heartbeat, the entire chapel felt suspended, in fragile hope. But then Claire's voice cut through, sharp as glass. "Nathan, don't you see? This is exactly what I warned you about." Her words struck the air like a whip. She stepped forward, her veil trembling with the force of her anger. "He's trying to make this about him. He's trying to ruin our day, our future. Can't you see? He's doing this for himself, not for you." Gasps rippled through the pews. Claire's parents nodded vigorously, desperate to regain control. Nathan turned to her, torn. "Claire, he's my father." "No," she snapped, her voice laced with venom. "He's a burden. Just like I told you. He's clinging to you because without you, he's nothing." The words sliced deeper than any blade. My false hope shattered in an instant, scattering across the marble floor like broken glass. Nathan's shoulders stiffened. The war in his eyes was visible. Loyalty to me, loyalty to her, the collision of past and future. For a moment, I thought he might still choose me. But then he whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Claire, let's just finish this." My chest hollowed. The hope that had flickered moments ago was snuffed out, leaving only cold ashes. The chapel exhaled, as if the moment of reconciliation had been nothing more than a passing illusion. And in that hollow silence, I knew, if they thought this was over, they were gravely mistaken. The silence in the chapel was brittle, like a glass about to crack. Nathan's words, "Let's just finish this," still echoed in my ears, heavy and final. The guests shifted uncomfortably, as if waiting for someone to end the standoff. I felt the weight of defeat pressing on me, my briefcase open, the papers scattered like my pride. For a moment, I thought this was it, my grandstand reduced to a sad interruption they'd all gossip about later. But then something I had almost forgotten slipped from the briefcase and landed on the marble floor with a metallic clink. The thermos. It rolled forward, dented and old, finally stopping at Nathan's polished shoes. He looked down at it, and the room held its breath. I saw recognition flash across his face, a memory, undeniable and raw. His shoulders tensed, his lips parted. It was the thermos we had carried on every fishing trip, the one I had filled with cocoa on freezing mornings, the one he had once clutched with both hands while telling me, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." He bent down, picked it up slowly, and for a moment his hands trembled. The guests were whispering now, confused, but Nathan wasn't listening to them. He was staring at the thermos as if it were a mirror to his past. "Dad," his voice cracked, low but piercing in the silence. Why did you keep this?" I swallowed hard, my throat raw. "Because it was ours. Because no matter how far you went, I thought one day you'd remember where you came from." The priest froze. The bride froze. Even Claire's parents, so full of scorn, looked uneasy. Nathan stared at the thermos as if the weight of 30 years pressed against his chest. His jaw clenched. His eyes glistened. For the first time that day, he didn't look like a polished lawyer or the groom in a perfect ceremony. He looked like my son again, the boy who used to run barefoot through the grass, laughing without shame. But then Claire's voice cut through, shrill and desperate. "Nathan, don't fall for this. It's just manipulation. He's trying to make you pity him." Her words snapped him back like a whip, and his grip tightened on the thermos. He turned toward her, his face pale, conflicted. "It's not manipulation," he said, his voice shaking. The guests erupted into whispers. The priest lowered his book, unsure what to do. Claire's face flushed red, her control slipping. And then Nathan did something no one expected. He placed the thermos carefully on the altar, next to the rings, in full view of everyone. "This," he said, his voice louder now, "is as much a part of me as any of this." He gestured toward the flowers, the suit, the polished spectacle. "And if anyone here can't accept that, then maybe this wedding shouldn't continue." Gasps filled the room. Claire's eyes widened in shock. Her parents rose to their feet, scandal painted across their faces. And me, I stood frozen, my heart thundering in disbelief. For the first time, it wasn't me forcing the truth into the light. It was Nathan, the boy I thought I had lost. I never imagined that a simple object, a dented, forgotten thermos, could stop an entire wedding. Yet there it was, sitting on the altar like a silent witness to every sacrifice I had made. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Sometimes, the smallest reminders of love carry the loudest voices of truth. But let me ask you this, what would you have done if you were standing in my shoes? Would you have walked away, letting them bury your story? Or would you have stood your ground, even if it meant tearing open the perfect picture they painted without you? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happened after Nathan placed that thermos on the altar changed everything in ways none of us could have predicted. The thermos sat on the altar, glowing in the candlelight like a relic unearthed from another life. The silence that followed Nathan's words was so heavy, it felt as though the vaulted ceiling itself might collapse. Then, chaos. Guests erupted into a storm of whispers and gasps. Claire's parents surged to their feet, their voices sharp and brittle. "Nathan, this is outrageous. You will not embarrass our family like this." But Nathan cut them off, his voice booming with a strength I had never heard from him before. "Embarrass? You think this is embarrassment? This," he pointed at the thermos at me. "This is truth. Claire grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Nathan, stop it. You're ruining everything. Don't you see what he's doing? He's trying to sabotage us. I stood still, letting it unfold, my chest heavy with both pride and dread. He's my father, Nathan shot back. His voice cracked, raw with anger and pain. The man who worked himself to the bone so I could stand here today. The man you all wanted to erase because he doesn't fit your world. The chapel fell into stunned silence again. Even the priest lowered his hands, unsure whether to intervene or step aside. Claire's father sneered. Nathan, you're being manipulated. Look around you. This is your future. Don't throw it away for the sake of some sentimental display. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but before I could speak, Nathan's voice thundered again. Sentimental. That man paid for my education, my home, my very chance to meet your daughter, and you call him sentimental? His voice broke, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. I told him not to come because I was ashamed. The words cut through me like a blade. A part of me wanted to crumble, to walk out and never look back. But another part, the part that had carried me this far, stood tall. Nathan's face twisted with guilt, ashamed of the calluses on his hands, ashamed of the boots he wore, ashamed of the very sacrifices that made me who I am. Claire gasped, horrified. Nathan, how dare you? How dare I? He snapped, pulling his arm free. How dare you make me believe that his love wasn't enough, that I had to choose between my future and my father? The guests sat frozen, torn between discomfort and awe. Some shifted in their seats, others leaned forward, hanging on every word. I finally stepped closer to the altar, my boots echoing through the silence. My voice was low but steady. Nathan, I never asked you for riches or approval or perfection. I only asked to be part of your life. I glanced at the thermos, then back at him. But I won't beg for it any more. The words hung in the air, final and sharp. Nathan's eyes glistened. Claire's face was pale with fury. Her parents looked ready to explode, but powerless in front of so many witnesses. And as the whispers swelled again, I knew this was just the beginning. The wedding was no longer a ceremony. It had become a battlefield. The chapel pulsed with tension, every breath from the guests shallow and nervous. Claire's face was twisted with fury, her voice sharp enough to slice the silence. This is manipulation, Nathan. He's making you feel guilty, and you're falling for it in front of everyone. He doesn't belong here. Her words rang out like venom, but they backfired. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the guests. They had seen my papers on the altar. They had heard Nathan's confession. They couldn't unsee the truth. Nathan's chest rose and fell, his hands trembling as he faced her. No, Claire, he does belong here. More than anyone, because without him none of this would exist. Her father surged forward, face red, voice booming. Enough of this nonsense. Nathan, either you marry my daughter now, as planned, or you will regret this day for the rest of your life. That was the breaking point. Nathan's hands slammed onto the altar, rattling the thermos and the documents. His voice thundered through the church. Don't you dare threaten me. Not today. Not here. The guests gasped. Some rose to their feet. Others sat frozen, torn between scandal and awe. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain this time, but from pride. For the first time, Nathan wasn't just my son. He was my equal, standing tall against the very world that tried to diminish us both. Claire's voice rose again, shrill, desperate. Nathan, listen to me. If you walk away from this, you walk away from everything we built together. Nathan turned to her, his voice quieter now but firm as steel. What we built? Or what your family demanded? You wanted to erase the man who raised me. That's not building, that's destroying. Her face crumpled, disbelief flooding her eyes. You can't mean that. But he did. Everyone could see it. Nathan lifted the thermos from the altar, holding it high for all to see. This may look like nothing to you, he said, his voice strong and steady, but this is my foundation. This is who I am, and if you can't accept him, his voice broke slightly, then you can't accept me. Gasps erupted. Claire staggered back as though struck. Her parents fumed, their perfect image crumbling into ashes before their guests. And then the most unexpected thing happened. Nathan placed the thermos in my hands. His eyes met mine, no longer ashamed, no longer divided. Dad, you belong here, with me. The words rang louder than any vow that could have been spoken that day. The chapel erupted, half in shock, half in awe. Claire's parents stormed out, their exit a thunder of heels and whispers. Claire followed, her veil trailing behind her like a torn flag of surrender. And just like that, the wedding was over. But the story, my story, had only just begun. The chapel was a storm of whispers and shuffling feet, the kind of noise that follows a disaster no one had prepared for. Claire's veil disappeared through the doors, her parents storming after her with their pride in tatters. Their seats at the front, once symbols of power, now stood empty, stark reminders of what had just collapsed. The priest cleared his throat, fumbling with his book. Perhaps we should pause the ceremony. His words trailed off, his voice barely audible over the restless crowd. But Nathan raised a hand. No, he said firmly. His voice carried a strength that silenced even the loudest whispers. This ceremony is over. At least, not in the way it was planned. Gasps spread through the room. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to leave or to stay. A few stood awkwardly, clutching their programs like shields, while others leaned forward, desperate to witness the unfolding drama. Nathan turned to me. His face was pale, his eyes red, but there was no shame anymore, only truth. He stepped closer, each movement slow and deliberate, as if crossing a distance far greater than the aisle between us. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "I told you not to come because I was scared. Scared that they'd see you and judge me. Scared that I wasn't enough if I admitted where I came from. But I was wrong." The words hit me harder than any blow. For years I had carried the weight of silence, of rejection. And now, in front of everyone, my son was undoing it with a few trembling sentences. "I can't marry someone who makes me ashamed of the man who gave me everything," Nathan continued, his voice steadier now. "If I lose this wedding, so be it. But I won't lose you." My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, but no words came. My hand brushed the dented thermos, its familiar weight anchoring me once again. I raised it slightly, as if to show him, "You never really lost me." The guests murmured again, but this time the tone was different. Some nodded in approval, others wiped at their eyes. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at a father and son, reclaiming something bigger than ceremony. Nathan turned to the priest. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly, "but this wedding isn't happening." The priest hesitated, then gave a solemn nod. "Marriage without truth cannot last. Perhaps this is for the best." A wave of movement swept the church as guests began to leave, some shaking their heads, others whispering, still others offering me small nods of respect as they passed. For the first time, I felt seen, not as an embarrassment, but as a man who had stood his ground. When the last of them filtered out, the church grew quiet again. Just Nathan and me, standing beneath the tall stained glass windows, colored light falling across us like a blessing neither of us had expected. Nathan approached slowly. For a moment, he looked like that boy again, the one who used to cling to my hand at the bus stop, the one who once called me his hero. His voice cracked. "Can you forgive me?" I placed the thermos in his hands. My answer was simple. Always. And for the first time in years, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not bitterness, not revenge, but a quiet justice. The kind that comes when the truth finally breaks free. The days after the wedding were a blur of headlines, whispers, and fractured reputations. Claire's family did everything they could to spin the story, painting me as an intruder, a bitter old man desperate for attention. But the truth had already seeped into every corner of that church. Everyone who had been there knew what they saw, a father reclaiming his place, and a son finally seeing the man who had carried him his entire life. I thought Nathan might retreat, might resent me for exposing the cracks so publicly. But instead, he showed up at my house 3 days later. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same scarred wood we had shared homework, dinners, and late-night talks across. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, dust motes swirling in the golden light. When the knock came, I half expected silence on the other side, an empty gesture of apology. But when I opened the door, Nathan stood there, shoulders slumped, tie loosened, eyes tired. He didn't speak at first, just stepped inside, his gaze falling to the old table, the thermos sitting on it like an anchor. "I ended it with Claire," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "Not just because of what happened, because I realized she wanted me to erase who I am, and who I am is yours as much as it's mine." The words broke something open in me. For years I had carried bitterness like armor, convincing myself that love was wasted on someone who had chosen another life. But here he was, my son, stripped of pretense, standing in the home I built with calloused hands, asking not for money, not for approval, but for forgiveness. We sat at the table together, silence heavy, but not hostile. I poured coffee into the dented thermos and handed him a cup, just like I used to on those early fishing trips. He stared at it for a long moment before smiling faintly. I forgot how good this tastes, he said. It wasn't about the coffee, it was about remembering. Weeks passed, and Nathan began showing up more often. Sometimes we'd sit in silence. Sometimes we'd talk about his cases at work. Sometimes we'd just watch the world pass by from the porch. The distance that had stretched between us for years slowly began to shrink, one quiet conversation at a time. He brought boxes of old photos from his apartment, pictures I thought he had thrown away. We spread them across the table, laughing at crooked smiles, bad haircuts, and fishing trips where neither of us caught more than a sunburn. Each photo was a reminder that while time had tried to erase me, memories never had. The thermos became more than a symbol, it became a bridge. He started carrying it to work some mornings, a quiet declaration that he wasn't ashamed of where he came from. And when people asked about it, he didn't hide the story. He told them, with pride. As for me, something shifted too. The bitterness that once hollowed me out began to fade. I realized that revenge hadn't been my true goal. It was recognition. And in that church, in front of everyone, I finally received it. Nathan wasn't perfect, neither was I. But somewhere between the scattered papers on the altar and the dented thermos on my table, we found a new kind of honesty, one built not on shame or silence, but on truth. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of embers, Nathan turned to me on the porch. His voice was quiet but steady. "Dad, if I ever have a son, I'll make sure he knows who built the foundation beneath his feet, and I'll make sure he never forgets it." The words filled me with a peace I hadn't felt in decades. I raised my cup from the thermos, the steam curling upward into the fading light. "That's all I ever wanted, son, just not to be forgotten." And for the first time in years, I believed I never would be. Looking back, I realized this was never about a wedding. It was about a voice, a father's voice, silenced for too long, finally breaking through the walls of pride, shame, and expectation. Sometimes the world tries to measure worth by titles, money, or appearances. But the truth is simpler. Love is the real foundation. And when that foundation is ignored, the entire house eventually cracks. That day, in front of a church full of strangers, I learned something. Justice doesn't always roar with anger. Sometimes it speaks softly, through an old thermos, a scarred table, a memory that refuses to be erased. Tell me, have you ever felt invisible to the very people you gave everything for? Share your story in the comments. I'll be reading. And don't forget to subscribe because more stories of truth and redemption are waiting.